Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This session focuses on the ethnography of speaking. I hope and expect by the end of this session, you would be able to have further clarity on the idea of ethnography of speaking or ethnography of communication. Well, my dear students, I hope and assume you already have some knowledge of the idea of ethnography of communication and ethnography of speaking. You, I hope, also know that both the terms are used as synonyms. I also assume that you have some basic knowledge that Ames was the person who introduced the idea of ethnography of speaking. He, in fact, was one of the major figures. He was one of the major sociolinguists who worked in this area and who actually worked on different aspects of language, going beyond the use of language within the linguistic structures. And he considered and emphasized that the social and the cultural context of language is important. So, my dear students, the ethnography of speaking, and as it is called ethnography of communication as well, is the analysis of communication within the wider context of the social and the cultural practices, beliefs, and attitudes towards language that exist in any particular culture or in particular community. Here I would give you the example of a church sermon. So, for example, in our Christian community, there is a church and there is a church sermon that the priest is going to deliver. If you look at this delivery of the church sermon, it is not only a linguistic act. It is a complete, a speech event. And when we say it is a complete speech event, actually we mean that it is a complete social event that involves certain things. There is a speaker and there is a listener. But apart from the speaker and the listener, there are some contents, the linguistic contents of the message that the speaker, in this case the priest, wants to communicate. And then there is a channel. This channel in this case is the voice, and probably if it is a big gathering, microphones would be used by the priest for that purpose. Then there is a particular register. What do I mean by register is, because this is a religious speech or sermon, so of course the register would be of religion, which means the language that would be used would be particular to the domain of religion. Now, when all this is taking place, there are certain underlined complex social rules of how to deliver that. If you think of how a preacher or a priest would deliver a religious sermon, it is a certain way of doing that which is not restricted to the language only. And any kind of breaches of the normal conditions of the sermon would make meanings, the process of the meaning making would be different, and what the priest wants to communicate probably in that case either would be different if it is done intentionally, or if it is unintentional, then the right meaning would not be conveyed. This provides us certain insights into certain facts, which communication acts or codes are important to different groups. A speech sermon is given to a certain group of people with who have gathered there with a certain intention for some religious activity or religious ceremony. So which acts of communication and which codes of communication are suitable for that? What kind of language choice the register, for example, this priest has to use? What types of meanings groups apply to different communication events? So, if a priest is using a particular language, if the priest is using a particular variety of a language, if the priest is using a particular register, if the priest is using a particular, pattern of speaking that is the tone, which includes the stress, unstress, intonation, voice quality, etc., how this particular group is making meanings out of that. How group members learn these codes in order to provide insights into particular communities. Now the familiarity of the group members who are listening to this sermon with this particular register is important in the meaning-making process. So, these additional insights would add to the understanding of the group dynamics in the process of communication. And, it would enable a better communication amongst the members of the group. It would also make sense of what is being said by different members of the community. And not only all this, this whole event of doing it would distinguish this group from other groups. It would distinguish it as a group that attended the sermon, and this would be a separate identity of the group from the other activities going on around in the social context, where people are engaged as groups in other kinds of activities. Well, my dear students, the ethnography of speaking or the ethnography of communication thus is the term that is meant to be descriptive of the characteristics that are not limited to language, that rather go beyond the language and encompass all the surrounding factors, the sociolinguistic, the sociocultural factors, behavior and attitude. So, Himes has made certain points of concern, or has made some points with reference to the ethnography of speaking. The first important aspect that he raises is that ethnography of speaking must investigate directly the use of language in contexts of situation, so as to discern patterns proper to speech activity, because this is what would distinguish what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. According to him, the second important aspect that ethnography of speaking must consider is that it must take as context a community of language use, investigating its communicative habits as a whole. It's not about the sermon of one priest and how a certain priest has a habit of delivering a certain sermon. It is about the patterns of delivering sermons in a particular community, how different priests, how all priests, how the whole community of priests in a particular speech community deliver sermons. And thirdly, what he says is, rather than divorcing linguistic form from its function, the analysis of the cultures or communities' communication through the linguistic as well as the non-linguistic and paralinguistic features needs to be done with reference to the social context. So, as far as the ethnography of speaking is concerned, today it is used as a tool for empirical studies to understand how in different cultures, different speech events are performed and different, processes of meaning making are, carried out in the social contexts.